Hello, my name is Christian and I'm a graphic designer based in Massachusetts. In this video, we'll be going over patterns and gradient mesh. These are notes from chapters 5 and 6 of Deke McClelland's Adobe Illustrator One-on-One Mastery. So first, I've created an object here. It's just a circle with just a number of strokes to get this kind of target effect. And I want to create this into a pattern. I've grouped the object and I'm just going to select it. And to make a pattern, I'm going to go to Object, Pattern, Make. And here we're in the pattern edit mode. And we have here a pattern options menu. And the values are things that you can change or the name. So right now I'm just going to name this to, let's say, yellow target. The other things you can change are the grid type. So right now it's a grid. And you can see that the original artwork is the center artwork. Oops, just want to change the icon. Uh, and what you can see here is the original artwork is in the center and it's repeated here in a grid of columns and rows. You can change it to be a different grid. You can do brick by row, and you can see the effect there on screen. You can also do brick by column. Another option is to do hex by column or hex by row. And we're just going to go back to grid. And one thing you can change is this box right here, the constraining box of the pattern. You can change it by here just by changing the values. And I'm going to link these just so they're the same. So if I increase it from 119 to 130, you can see that there's more space in between our object because we've increased the space of this box relative to our object. If we make it smaller, if I make it into, let's say, 90, you can see that there's less space, so these start overlapping each other. And right now we're overlapping in a grid, and the top objects are overlapping over the bottom objects, the left objects are overlapping on top of the right objects. You can change that here, there's overlap settings. You can change from left in front, you can change it to right in front, and now you can see the right objects are on top. And you can also change the top in front to bottom in front. And you can see the bottom is now in front of the other objects. I'm going to go back to the original settings. And one thing you can do if you want to return to maybe kind of what it started off as, you can size the tile to art. And this will mean that it'll just take the size of the tile size and it will just fit it to the art. The move tile to art is if you were, I would say, working with multiple objects and you wanted one to be the central object. Everything moves with it. Not really the case in this example, let's say, but we're just going to uncheck that. And one thing you can do is this is really only for previews is copies. If you just wanted to see 1 by 1 or 3 by 3, you can change the options here. And again, this is only for previewing here. You will not affect the actual pattern when you end up using it. You can dim the copies, so if you want the copies to be 100%, so you can see exactly how the pattern will look like, you can do that, or you can dim it so you know which one is the original. You can also show the tile edge or not. So if you hide the tile edge, and if you also dim the copies, or actually don't dim the copies, if you put the copies to 100% opacity, you can see exactly how the pattern will look. For me, I just want to test something out. I just want to see if I can do 117. Let me try 115. I kind of like the idea of these lines overlapping each other being the same weight when they touch. Not that it matters much, just something I wanted to see. This kind of just intersection here. That's how you create a pattern. And this is the edit pattern window. Just so you know, up here, you can save a copy of the current pattern. You can click done to be done, which will save. And you can click cancel. Cancel will undo anything that you've changed here. So I've changed the height and width values, named it, and I think that's it. yeah. Hitting escape will also actually save it. It won't actually cancel you out. So right now, what I'll do is I'll click done, and I'll see. You can see here in the swatches that the yellow target has been created, and we're just gonna create a box, a blue box here, and make sure that the fill is selected. And we're gonna go into the swatches and click on our yellow target. And you can see that the yellow target pattern has been applied within that object, that rectangular object. Now, if you want to change how it appears within the object, you can do so, and we'll do that a little bit later. But one thing I want to go back into creating and editing the pattern. So let's say I'm in the pattern and I'm going to yellow target. I double click on it, and let's say I want to do a different version where the circles are not touching. Let's say so I'm going to increase the tile size to 130. You can see that they're no longer touching. And just to make it even more apparent that this is different than the original, I'm going to change it to hex by column. And I'm going to actually increase it to 150. So you can see now that this is significantly different than our original. And what I want to do is I want to save a copy of this. I'm going to change the name to yellow target 2. I'm going to click OK. And then this message is very important. The new pattern has been added to the swatches panel. Any additional changes made while in pattern editing mode will be applied to the original pattern, not the copy. So I'm going to keep this up. Normally I hit do not, don't show again, but for this one, this is actually kind of important. So I'm going to click OK. So we have a new pattern here. It's already been created. Yellow target 2. Within this pattern edit mode, we are still working on the original yellow target, as you can see here. So if I hit done or hit escape, it's going to save over our original yellow target, which I don't want to do because we've created a copy. I want to cancel out. And now you can see that nothing has changed with our original pattern. If I select this object here, I can apply our new pattern to it, yellow target 2, and you can see how different it is, which is great. Now, let's say for some reason you don't like the scale. You think that within this, the circles they're just too big. You just want more of them within the pattern. You could go back into the actual pattern and edit it that way. But there's I think a better way, a more I don't know, a quicker way. Let's say. So to do that, we go to the scale tool here, with shortcut S. We have our object selected, and we hit enter to enter the scale menu. And I'm just going to change this back to 100. It was already changed to something else. And uncheck the preview. So this is how you should probably see it originally. So what we want is more of these circles, more of this pattern. We want the circles to be smaller, and we want more of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the scale to 50%. We're going to hit the preview button, or checkbox that is, and you're going to see that the object and the pattern have been scaled down, but we didn't want the box to scale down. We only wanted the pattern. So what we're going to do is we're uncheck transform objects. So the box stays the same, but the pattern is what's scaled down. And I'm going to uncheck the preview checkbox to see what it was previously and check it again. So you can see that we've scaled it down. And of course, we can scale it down further to 30% if we want. And I'm just going to click OK. And yeah, that's how you create a pattern and scale it. Next, I want to go over modifying a pattern. Now for this, I'm not going to use our original target. I'm going to delete that. What I want to work with is these lines here. And it's always good practice to duplicate. So I'm going to drag my modify pattern here. This is the layer I'm working on. I'm going to drag it into this icon here. And that is going to duplicate my pattern. I'm just going to hide it and lock it because now I've created a copy that I can refer back to if I ever need to. Because when working with a pattern, you always want to have an original reference to return to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these, and I want to make a pattern of these but I want to show you some of the limitations of the pattern edit mode. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to effects, and I'm going to do, what effect do I like? Distort and transform, and we're going to do zigzag. Hit the preview checkbox to see what we're doing. You can see that there's a zigzag pattern being applied to these lines. I want it to be a little bit more pronounced, and I want a couple more segments, but not that many. And let's say the size is a little bit too big, and we're going to bring that down a little bit. And great, so let's say this is exactly what I want. This is a good pattern, or this is the basis for which I want to create a pattern. So I'm going to click OK on the zigzag menu. And just like before, to create a pattern from this, we have everything selected. We're going to go to Object, Pattern, Make, and we're back into the Pattern Edit menu. And one thing you'll notice is that the pattern doesn't line up right to left quite perfectly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit out of here. I'm going to click Cancel. I'm going to go back into our object here. In order to go back to our original effect, I'm going to go here into the Appearance panel. You can also find the Appearance panel through Window, Appearance, shortcut Shift F6. And you can see in the Appearance panel that we have this zigzag effect. I'm going to click on the effect to edit it, and we'll return back to the zigzag menu. And what I want is it to be able to repeat. And in order to do that, I want this end, you see how it's going up and out. I want this one to go up and out as well. So I'm going to include one more zigzag, go to 9, click preview. And you see that this is going up and out, and this is going up and out. So when they repeat, they'll meet at the apex, the top, and then they'll descend back down. So I'm going to click OK. And that should help us when we're creating our pattern. So we're going to go back to Object, Pattern, Make. And now you can see that it almost is seamless, almost going through. What we want to do is we want to adjust the tile. So in the pattern options, the first thing we're going to do is rename this. We're going to rename this to zigzag. Zigzag pattern. Grid is fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to click this maintain width and height proportions, because we're not concerned about maintaining the proportions. The width, we want to decrease the width from 725 to, let's say, 720. And as these get closer and closer, as we decrease this, we'll lose the semblance of that being a seam, being it not connected, not part of one. We've gone a little too far. And this isn't the perfect way to do it. This is just the quick and dirty way to do it. And that's okay for our purposes right now. The height, I want to increase the height so there's not this big white gap between everything. So from 205, I'm going to try 180. We can go even further down, and I think you can just hit the down. Yep, I could just hit the down arrow to keep it going. I think that's almost perfect. Maybe one more. That feels about right. Okay, and so now we've got this pattern created from this, which is great. We've named it. We're just going to save it by clicking on Done, which is perfect and great. Next, we're going to create an object, right? We're going to go to our rectangle tool here, M. Go make sure we have our layer selected. We're going to create a box. And with this box, we're going to swap it, the stroke and the fill, so the fill is active. And within our swatches menu, which you can find here, again, this is also found with Window Swatches. And you see the check mark because it's active. We're going to find our zigzag pattern here, and we're going to click on it to apply it. And perfect, we've got this zigzag pattern within this object. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up with this zigzag effect is to show you some of the limitations of the pattern edit mode. We're going to enter the edit pattern mode, and I can just marquee selection our lines here. And change those zigzag effect. And I'm going to go to the appearance panel, and there is no zigzag effect. And that's because any effects that are created into a pattern, whether it be blurs, drop shadows, gradients, or like this zigzag effect, they are expanded upon when you create a pattern. So the only way for me to change this pattern is if I go back to my original object. One thing I want to show you is that how you can change the position of the pattern within the object. And to do that, I want to go back to our original pattern. And when I click on the object, you can see that the center point, this red dot, which I'm actually going to change it to a different color so we can see it more easily to, let's say, a dark blue. Click OK. It's actually more difficult to see. So I will change it to orange, yellow, cyan. Let's go to cyan. And it still may be a little difficult for you guys to see, but on my screen it is okay. What I'll do instead to make this a little bit easier for all of us is I will bring up the rulers with Control R, and that is Command R on a Mac. I'm going to click on this rule here, and I'm going to drag it out onto the center point. I'm going to do the same from the top rule, drag it down onto the center point. And what I want is I want the pattern, the center point of the pattern, to be the center point of this object. And to do so, I'm going to have the black arrow tool selected. The shortcut for that is V. Click it also here in the toolbar panel. Click on our object, and with our object selected, we're going to hit Enter or Return on a Mac. And here comes the Move Menu dialog box. And what I want to do is I want to move any of these circles to be the center point here. So for the horizontal, I'm going to hold Shift and hit the down arrow. Oh, we've got a little too far, so now I'm going to release Shift and I'm going to hit the up arrow. And that's about close enough. I'm going to hit Tab to go down into the vertical position. I'm going to hit Shift and down arrow to bring that up. I think I'm actually going to hit up arrow. I'm going to click OK. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom in so I can see this a little bit better. And I can see that it's a little bit off. So I'm going to I'm going to select the object again with the black arrow tool, hit Enter, and we've completely messed our thing up. What I want to do, I think, can we go to, no. So I guess we should have just started this way, zoomed in so we can be very, very precise. But we'll just do it all over again, I suppose. So we will change the horizontal position. And it might need to be like it's almost like in between pixel value, which let's test to see if you can actually do a in between. You can, perfect. And the vertical, again, it looks like it's an in between. So we're going to do 22.5. And it actually might be a little bit more than 0.5. Ooh, that looks just about center. So when I zoom, oh, I'm just going to hit the Z distance. I don't think, well, I messed up there. Let me hit Control Z. Well, I guess I'll have to cancel. Okay. And now we're just going to adjust the values to get this just to be exactly precise. So if I hit the horizontal down, it goes a little too far. So it's not -1. I believe it is actually -0.5. Maybe maybe 0.75. Oh no, it's actually 0.25. That looks about right. The vertical, let me see if I bring that. It's not -1, it's a -0.5. Nope, too much. 0.25. that looks just about right. It looks perfect, actually. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to zoom out, and you can see that the pattern, the centermost circle, has been centered into the object. And that's just something if you wanted to position the pattern relative to the containing object. That's how you would do that. So now let's go over gradient mesh. So first I want to create an object, and I'm just going to change the fill to this blue value. I'm going to create an object here, this rectangle, this blue rectangle, and I want to create a gradient mesh. So what a gradient mesh does is it makes these grids or nodes within an object, which you can change the color of. And the gradient or the mesh tool is shortcut U, or it's also right here in your panel, mesh tool. And you'll get this this arrow with a like a grid and a plus sign, and this means you'll be able to add a mesh point. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add one to the center. You can see that it created a vertical and horizontal line, a column or row, if you will, and you can also do that again wherever you click. And if there is no row or column where you click, it will create a row and a column, as you can see here. If you click somewhere where there's already a row, it will just create a column. If you click somewhere where there is just a column, it will create just a row. And now we have this grid here, this, let's say, 4x4 grid. And now if we go to the white select tool, I can select a specific point within this grid and double click on our fill to bring up the color picker. And I can just change the color value. And we could do that for multiple objects. If I want to click here, change this, maybe I want this one to be darker, we can do that. Another way to edit the colors here is, let's say I'm going to deselect this object. I'm going to go into our swatches panel, and I'm going to bring up a, let's see, a color book or default swatches. I'm going to bring up a color default swatches for art and illustration. And let's say I want this almost indigo purplish value. I want that to be one of these points. I'm going to actually click on it and drag it into the location I want. So let's say I want this bottom right corner. You can see it just grabs that corner. And right now we've just been editing the color values of a point. You can also just color the square here. This whole patch is what you would call it. So if I go back and let's say I want to do this. Oops, I had everything selected. I'm sorry. I make sure everything's deselected. I'm going to click and drag this color into the middle, into this patch. You can see that this whole patch, all four points were changed in color. And that's just a couple of ways to change the color to add points of the gradient mesh. And if you want to delete just a column or just a row, with the mesh tool selected, you hover over the line or the column that you want to delete, hold down the Alt or Option key, and click on the column. I'm going to undo that with Control Z, Command Z on a Mac, and I'm just going to show you that you can do the same thing with a row. Again, you're holding down the Alt or Option key with the mesh tool selected, hovering over the line you want to delete, and you can click on it and it will remove that line. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. That's also Command Z on a Mac. And yes, so that's how you can add points to a gradient mesh, remove points, add columns, rows, etc., color different portions of the gradient mesh. This is usually mostly, I would say, for lights and shadows, for volume of an object, let's say like an apple, or like products like TVs, cars, um, things that you need to show kind of a 3D presence without, let's say, doing a full 3D model. And let's say you wanted to create a gradient mesh, but you didn't want to do it manually by clicking on each point. You can also automate the process. So let's say I've created this rectangle here. You can also just go to Object, Create Gradient Mesh, and you've got this Create Gradient Mesh pop-up menu. And you've got options for how many rows, columns you want to add. I have the preview checkbox on. I have the preview checks. I have the preview checkbox on, so you can see that we have 4 rows, 4 columns. Appearance is flat, which is probably what you're going to be using most of the time. The other options are center and edge, which will add a highlight to either one that you select. So I'll show you for center. You can see that it has a highlight, which I believe is just a default white. You can change the highlight percentage here. If we change the edge, all the edges will be white. And yeah, it doesn't really change much because you could go back and just change the color values after you've created it. But if you want to start off with a highlight on the edges or in the center, you have the option to do so. For now, I want to use flat. So I'm going to hit on flat and I'm going to hit OK. And we've created a gradient mesh. And also this is more uniform, let's say, than our original, which is, let's say, a 4x4, but not exactly are all the cells within this grid uniform or the same. So if you want more of a uniform look, you can do that. And you can manipulate this just like you did before. You can add points still. You can remove points. It acts just like a gradient mesh would. And of course, you can change the color of any of these points. And another thing that we didn't go over is that these points are just like any other, uh, created object in a vector object in Illustrator with anchor points that can be moved and with handles that can adjust the shape. One thing to note is if I undo this, is that you can adjust the intensity of the blend between 2 different colors through the handle points. So I'm going to zoom in here to this blue, and in particular I want to showcase the transition between this blue here and this purple color here. And you can see that right now it's a smooth transition, and if I click with my white arrow selection tool, you can see that there's handles here, handles on the bottom here. This handle is coming from the blue and this handle is coming from the purple. Uh, if I bring this one closer in to the center of the blue, you can see that the value has been shifted where more of the purple is asserting more intensity as throughout this distance of the gradient. I can exaggerate that by pulling out the purple to have this one dominate more across the length of this segment of the gradient mesh. One thing is if you wanted to create a more stark contrast between the two, you can actually extend them past each other, the handles. So I'm extending the blue past the purple. And you see they're overlapping, and you can go even further to illustrate just kind of the extremes for which that you can do with these. And just to showcase kind of what we're doing, I just want to show you how far we were going with it. And you can see now that the transition is very stark. You can see that it is no longer a smooth blend between the 2 colors. And this is something that you can manipulate. You can manipulate how the blend is between the 2 colors. You can create some, very interesting abstract art or some very nice highlights and shadows that are very realistic for certain objects. This is just one way to do it in Illustrator. Not one of my preferred, but this is a tool that you can use for creating these kind of effects. All right, so next I want to go over another method to create a gradient mesh. And this is from working on a pre-existing or created gradient. So for this, You can see in the color fill here that we have a gradient. And I'm just going to close out of this, and I'm going to go into the gradient panel here, which you can obviously find with Window Gradient. The shortcut is Control F9. And we have a gradient here of multiple values of these reds, blues, and purples. And obviously, I can show you that they're adjusted here, so you can see that it is just a regular gradient, a linear one that goes from top to bottom. And I'm going to duplicate this by clicking on it, holding Alt and Shift or Option Shift on a Mac, and just dragging it out to the right. And I want to work with this object. So we have the original here, which I'm just going to lock with Control 2 or Command 2, which is just to lock an object so I don't select it by accident. With our new object selected, I want to change this from being a gradient into a gradient mesh. And to do that, I'm going to go into Object, Create Gradient Mesh, just like we did earlier. And you can see that this is not the effect we were looking for, right? It's just filled it with black. So I'm going to cancel out. And before we create the gradient mesh, we have to do one thing first, and that is to expand this. So we're going to go to Object, Expand, and we're going to go to Expand Gradient to Gradient Mesh. And the fill is the only thing that you need selected. And I'm going to click OK. And you can see that the change, there's a little difference in the and you can see in expanding the gradient, we have a little bit of a change. They're not exactly one-for-one transition or one-for-one like for like. We can change that, we can edit that, but right now I want to go over what we've created and how to manipulate this as a gradient mesh. So if I select my object, I can see that it's not really a gradient mesh yet. It actually is, if you look on the top left here, it is a group. And that's what this selector name shows us. So you can see what exactly what you have selected, what is it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ungroup this object. So I'm going to go to Object. Oh, sorry, no, it's Edit. Is it? Oh man, I forgot how to ungroup something because normally I just use the shortcut. So let me see. What is it? Where is it, rather? Yes, it is an object. So to ungroup this object, we're going to go to Object, Ungroup, which the shortcut is Shift Control G. And now the object is ungrouped. We currently have a clip group. And what I want to do is I want to release this clip group. And to do that, I'm going to go to Object, Clipping Mask, and I'm going to hit Release. On a PC, it is Alt Control 7. On a Mac, I believe it's Option Command 7. So we have it released, and now you can see these horizontal lines of the gradient mesh. Right now we have a mixed object here. So what I want to do is I want to deselect by clicking on anywhere on the artboard that is not the object. I have no selection currently, as you can see. I'm going to click on this, and you can see that it's the gradient. I want to remove the clipping mask and the group that was previous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to marquee selection while holding shift. And marquee selection is just to drag a square like this. And holding shift makes it so I will not select what I have currently selected. So now I have the rectangle selected. I'm going to delete that. And what I'm left with here is just this mesh. And now we can manipulate this just like we would any other mesh. We can, with the mesh tool selected here, shortcut U, we can add points. Just notice that adding points does not, it's not grabbing the current color from the gradient. It is introducing the color that we have in the fill, which is not what I want to do, but I just want to show that you can add points. You can also obviously delete them by holding down Alt or Option with the mesh tool selected. And that's what I want to do. I want to delete them, and it's going to delete those colors that I've introduced as well. what you can see is that it has left some of the horizontal bands. So what I'll do is I'm just going to Command or Control Z to undo all of the changes we've done to this to return back to our original gradient. And other things you can do to manipulate this is obviously you can manipulate the handles to affect how the gradient blends into itself. And you can also change the position of the anchor points. So let's say we wanted to make it wider at the base. And let's say we wanted to make it a little bit smoother. So we've got this angled, let's say. And we'll change this angle as well to make it smoother. And these are just minor little changes we've made. But it does affect the overall look and feel of this piece of art. And we can even bring up that a little bit. Let's say we'll bring this down even more. So let's have more of a stark contrast between these two, or less of a more harsh blend between the two. And you can see we've changed just very, very small bits of the original gradient to create something just a little bit different. And obviously you can go further with this than I've done here. I just want to show you how to create a gradient mesh and work with it from a linear gradient. Another gradient that you can use as the base for your gradient mesh is a radial gradient. So first we're going to select our object here. We're going to see that it is filled with a radial. You can see that it's filled with a radial gradient. In the gradient menu, we can see that that's true. It's a radial gradient with these blues and some greens. I'm going to close that menu. I'm going to click on drag while holding Alt Shift, Option Shift on the Mac to duplicate our object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control or Command 2 to lock our original, just in case if we ever want to return to it, and so that I don't select it by accident. So just like we did previously, we're going to select this object. We're going to expand it first, because that's the only way we'll be able to create a gradient mesh out of it. So I'm going to Object Expand. Make sure that Expand Gradient 2 has the gradient mesh checked. Okay. And you can see it's changed a little bit again. It is a group, so we're going to want to try and ungroup that. I'm going to hit Control Shift G or Command Shift G on a Mac. And we're going to see that it is now currently the clip group. I'm going to keep it within the clip group because it looks rather strange if I don't. So I'm going to hit Control Alt 7 or Command Alt 7 to release the clipping mask just to show you. That's not something I want to work with. I want to keep it constrained within the clipping mask. I kind of like how it looks within the clipping mask. What I will do though is I will hold Shift while Marquee selecting to select everything that is not currently there. So I think it looks like we're fine. I don't think there's actually anything behind it. Nope. Or on top or anything weird. So one thing to note is that we have created this into a gradient mesh. And if I double click into our object, you can see that it has this radial shape. It's got this vertical and horizontal line. And these points can be changed and manipulated. As you can see, you can move them. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see a little bit clearer. So you can move the points. You can manipulate the handles. And you can change the color. If I double click on the fill, you can change the color. Right, just like you would any other gradient mesh. The main thing to note though is that this is not actually a radial gradient mesh. It actually is just folded upon itself. And if I deselect it and zoom in, it looks like it's a perfect seamless transition here, but there's actually a fold on the right horizontal. And I'll show you what I mean. If I go in and I select one of these points on the right horizontal and bring it down, you can see that there's a gap because there's actually a seam that shows up. Right here is where the fold happens. And you can I'll just keep going down the line. And you can see that the fold, where is it? Let's see where the fold ends. Just so many points, it's a little confusing. But yeah, you can see that the fold ends here, right? There's only one point on the left, there's only one point on the bottom, there's only one point on the top. But on the right side, there's all these points and they get folded um, upon itself. In practice, it's just good to know. I'm going to undo everything by hitting Control Z. If you just wanted to treat this like a regular gradient, like a radial gradient, and want to be able to select everything here, the best way to do that, like you could just click on it, but you might only select one point. You could marquee select, but when you marquee select, you'll be selecting the fill, so you'll be moving just the portion of it. If you want to select both points here at the same time easily, go into your preferences, which is Control or Command K. You can also do it by going, I believe, File, nope, sorry, Edit, Preferences. And what we want to change is the Selection and Anchor Display. Within the section anchor display, we want to change the object selection. We want it to be object selection by path only, okay? And what you notice now is that I cannot select by fill anymore. I can only select by path. So I can click on a path, but I cannot click as I'm clicking here either with a black or white arrow tool. I cannot click on the fill. But I can marquee select, and I have to enter the clipping mask first. I can marquee select right here. So I can select both points, keeping them together and treating it almost like it is a radial pattern, like so. And that's how you manipulate those. If you want to add points, you can add it onto the horizontal and it'll create a circle, or you can put it on the circle and it will create a line extending outward from the center. I'm just going to undo those. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. So right now I just want to change some of these color values so you can see kind of what we can change. Let's say, for instance, I'm going to try and make the top portion of this a little bit lighter. And to do that, I'm going to fake it by extending this green outward so that it becomes more prominent on the top. And we're running into some issues because of the double handle. But I'm just a marquee selecting and just dragging these handles out. And you can see that there's some difference here where this blue is a little bit wider on the bottom, not so much on the top. I'm going to make that more prominent by bringing this blue value up and by bringing this green value much higher. Okay. And now I just want to select all of this. I want to select this and just change this green to be a brighter green, which I think it already is, but I will just exaggerate that and change this blue to be a little bit lighter. Change this blue to also be a little bit lighter. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll go down here, change this blue to be darker, change this green to be darker, and then change this, oops. Oh, am I still in the, no. Let me zoom out a bit, and I want to change this, if I can. Anchor point, yeah. But it doesn't have a fill value. Strange. And I'm just going to deselect, and you can see that by just changing these certain colors, you get this almost spherical or some volume to it. Again, I didn't go light from the center and then dark all around. I went light up here and then dark on the bottom, but it gives you a little bit more volume, something different than just the traditional standard radial gradient. And it's a mesh, so you can also just manipulate the points if you just wanted to make something even less standard. If you wanted to make more of an egg shape, or really play with the colors within the object. Right? If you wanted to do something even more distinct or manipulate it even further, you can. All right, and that's it for this video, going over patterns and gradient mesh. I hope you learned something and this was beneficial to you. Please let me know by sending me a comment or a like on the video. Please let me know if you want to learn something in the future or if these videos have been helpful. I really appreciate any feedback. And thanks for watching the video, and see you guys soon in the next one. Bye.